In a new op-ed for the New York Times, Democratic strategist James Carville writes that the most important thing for Democrats to know is why they lost 2024. He says, "I've been going over this in my head for the past 2 months. All the variables, all the what-ifs, all the questions about Joe Biden's re-election decisions and what kind of Democrat or message might have worked against Donald Trump. I keep coming back to the same thing. We lost for one very simple reason. It was, it is, and it always will be the economy, stupid. We have to begin 2025 with that truth as our political North Star and not get distracted by anything else."
Carville was confident during the campaign that Vice President Kamala Harris would emerge as the victor. He wrote an op-ed in October for the Times titled "3 Reasons I'm Certain Kamala Harris Will Win." His 3 reasons were that Trump was an electoral loser, Harris had more money, and that he just had a feeling she would prevail. And we are happy that joining us now to discuss why the result went the way it is James Carville himself. Thanks for joining us, James.
Well, thank you very much.
So just to get back briefly to the election result itself, was it the vice president who didn't make the economic argument as well as she should have? Or was there too much of a distraction from the party at large onto other issues that you think were less salient?
Well, I mean, it's, of course, I'll say what you expect me to say. It's not an either-or proposition. Had President Biden gotten out in, say, May of 2023, I don't have any doubt that Democrats would have won, and it wouldn't have been close. I understand the fundamental of this election in literally 90, I don't know, I'd say 99, it might even be 100, is do people want to change or do they want to stay on the direction that they're going? This was a 70% wrong track country. And we didn't offer people what they were looking for, and that's something different. And, the fact that we came as close as we did probably shows how I would interpret that as an underlying weakness on Trump's part, but you can interpret it any way that you want to. But clearly, where you have over 2/3 of the country that says we're in the wrong direction, we need something new. You got to give them something new. And that moment on The View, when you said, "What would you have done differently in Biden?" and you said, "I can't think of anything," my heart sank. But look, did I honestly think that a combination of we were winning elections everywhere after Dobbs, and Trump was so odious, and we had more money, we had more organization, we had more of everything. We actually had one debate, we won the debate, but we still lost the election. And we lost the election for a simple reason. Voters wanted change, and we refused to say we were going to give them change, which is hopefully it never happens again.
James, you took some heat from the Democrats during the campaign saying that Democrats had a liberal women problem, a preachy women problem. What made you think that Kamala Harris could sort of overcome that perception of her as sort of the school marm candidate?
Well, I think she was aware of it. I think the Governor Walz election, we could say whether it did any good or not, but that he was clearly a middle of the country all in on mail. And if you notice, she would talk about somebody breaks in her house, she's going to shoot them. She didn't use any of that NPR language, which is so devastating to Democrats. That and all of the permutations of that go forward. And I don't have a big, other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how was the play? But other than offering the voters a change, she actually was a pretty good candidate.
You mentioned there, James, what you term NPR language, which I know from previous conversations we have had, you don't really like the term woke or the term wokeness, but by NPR language, I think you mean this kind of, well, what used to be called politically correct language. What is it that you think is electorally so damaging to Democrats about the use of that language?
So what you look for with politics revolves around things we call sticky, things that you remember, like defund the police. Okay, 3 stupidest words in the history of the English language. but it's stuck. All right, and they use this code of Latinx, of which literally nobody uses. It actually puts people off. My favorite of all is cultural appropriation. What the hell is that? And I make the case that if you come to New Orleans and you buy a sweatshirt and says, I got bourbon face on shit street, I'm not going to say you appropriate our culture, you eat red beans and rice, and say you want some more. I mean, the idea, most cultures want to be appropriated, that people are proud of their culture. Yeah, I mean, it's some of the stuff is just so idiotic that it defies imagination that people actually live like this. Could you imagine? I live in a majority black city. If I saw three black guys on a street corner and I said, "Good morning, fellas, how are things in the community of color today?" They wouldn't know what I was talking about. They said, "That goddamn guy's crazy, man. Somebody needs to put him away." And I mean, the language is so idiotic and so counterproductive that I have to point that out. Now we're trying to the credit of the candidates. Most everybody is trying to get away from this and rub this stench off, and hopefully it'll be gone by 2026. But you look at the data, the late breaking people believed all of this, and NPR have a right to do what they want to do. They still, I listen to it they still use this ridiculous language. I don't know what they think they're doing, but I guess it's their company. They can do what they want with it. But it's very counterproductive. I can tell them that.
You write in the New York Times piece that Democrats need to take back the issue of immigration by tying it to economics and having a populist message on that issue.
Right.
But we have seen overlap between members of the progressive left, like Bernie Sanders, and the Trump campaign, talking about immigration's effect on economics by the way of potentially taking American jobs,
Yes.
particularly on the H-1B issue. But you seem to have the opposite view of that. How do you figure that importing more foreign laborers is the populist position on immigration?
So let me back up on the steering. I do not view Senator Sanders. I probably have issued some of his proposals, but he doesn't use very much of that idiotic language, to his credit. Okay, he does talk in ways that people can understand him. What's going to happen on immigration? First of all, you got to make them not so much that they're against immigration, they're anti-immigrant. People, if you poll, people like immigrants. They really do. What they don't like is disorder. And anytime you have disorder, there's a price to pay for it. Now, it's one of these things where we don't use this crazy faculty loud language anymore. The border crossings are now very modest, and it's not disorderly at all. But you got to understand where this policy came from was the identity left that was pushing for open borders, of which no one wants. I say no one wants. I guess some of 5 members of Congress want it, but that's about it. And immigrants are just a real part of American life. And by the way, and we're going to see if Trump fulfills his promises, starts deporting people, this is going to be very, very unpopular. Very unpopular.
And just, James, to get back to your economic argument, because the New York Times piece was not
Right.
just a critique of the language and the identity left and all of that. It was actually an advocacy for concentrating on economics. So basically, your argument is that lots of Republican economic proposals are unpopular, cutting taxes for the rich or imposing tariffs, and that Democrats could really seize the political and economic narrative by talking about things like increasing the minimum wage. That's where you see the path ahead for your party, clearly.
Just say, I hear this nonsense. Oh, only 20 states don't have the federal minimum wage. There's not many people. What you're just saying to people, I see you. We need a raise. Okay, the specific is less Pardon, the most popular thing we can do, and it's always the most popular thing, is taxing high-income people and using that revenue to give people who are not high-income people a better opportunity in life. So why didn't we, as opposed to saying inflation is under control because younger people particularly, think life is too expensive, let's tax incomes over $400,000 a year, take that money and put it in a home buyer mortgage relief fund or rental assistance to people that are being crushed by these high rental rates. I mean, you got to see people where they are, and that would be way more popular than student loan forgiveness, which is a kind of targeted thing. I like to remind people, if I could put one sign at NPR, it'd be there are more students at Miami-Dade than there are in the entire Ivy League. All right, and we tend to forget that. We think every 22-year-old just graduated from Duke, and that's clearly not the case.
There was some talk from Democrats on the campaign trail about whether or not Trump's tariff policy would increase inflation, but people clearly didn't believe it. A lot of people pointed to the fact that Trump had tariffs during his first admin. Inflation didn't seem to rise until Biden took office, and he kept in a lot of those tariffs, particularly the ones on China, in place. Do you think that the Democrats have an expert problem, meaning they appeal too much to the quote-unquote experts and ignore, perhaps, for lack of a better term, the lived experiences of Americans?
So let me take the question. The Democrats have an expertise problem that we think we see a problem in as a technical solution to the problem. Yes, we do. All right. But the tariffs, remember, he had to pay, I think, $60 billion in compensation to American farmers for everything they lost. And he puts more on. I'd like somebody to tell me a case in history where tariffs have really worked well. I mean, there's some economists and experts that say that some limited things that they can be of some use. And my own view, this is my view, but the thing about these tariffs, they're selective and they're really subject to political shakedown. In other words, if I'm in an industry and I need imports and I say exempt me from the tariff, and next thing you know, you got a healthy campaign contribution. And you will never ever convince me that that does not go on, and it does not go on with some regularity, because I believe that it does.
James, just to finish this off, you've been generous with your time. On the topic of Trump, I think one of the points you made in the New York Times op-ed that I think you might be fighting an uphill battle with your own party on was your suggestion that really Democrats need to stop the focus being about Trump. They need to stop talking about Trump so much. Now, I guess the pushback from that within the party would be that people in the Democratic Party see him as an active danger to American democracy. But tell me more about why you think they need to talk less about Trump.
First of all, he is a danger to democracy. He's a danger to the rule of law. He's a danger to the security of the United States. All of that I deeply and profoundly believe. But when you're in an election, people are going to want an election about their lives, not the candidate's life. And I take a back seat to no one in my contempt for Trump and what a unpatriotic glob of protoplasm he is, or however you want to describe it. But the problem with talking about Trump's life the entire time is you're not talking about people's lives. And, Bill Clinton taught one of the most underappreciated thing in '92 when we were, getting swarmed by all these negative stories. He said, they want to have an election about my life and my dreams, and I want to have an election about your life and your dreams. And that's viable, useful political advice. The question is not, to me, do we want to get rid of Trump? Of course we do, but what's the most effective way? And by the way, he can't run for for re-election anyway. He's too unhealthy, but in addition to that, he's constitutionally prohibited from doing it. So we should talk about, and Paul, look what's coming up. Extending these tax cuts for wealthy people, subsidies for Obamacare, all right? And there's a whole record of them trying to cut government entitlement programs. So that would be Social Security, Medicare, and this is a big word. This is the word, the biggest word. You know, every year they have the word of the year. A year from now, the word of the year is going to be Medicaid. People do not understand that. Republicans don't. Medicaid is just as popular as Medicare. And if you go to any county that Trump carried and look at the number of people, the Medicaid transfer payments there, it's staggering. So that my prediction is the word of the year for 2025 is going to be Medicaid.
James Carville, it is always a pleasure to have you here. Thanks for joining us on
Well,
Rising.
thank you. I love doing these little periodical podcasts on the Hill. I'm a big fan of the Hill. I think he's got some really nice journalism, and we had a terrible thing happen here in New Orleans, but we soldier on, and we're soldiering on now and move on, and let's see what happens in 2025. But just remember, let's have an election about their lives, not someone else's life. I think that's a good message to remember. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, James.